This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, performance.
Welcome to the American Theater Wing Seminars on Working in the Theater. I'm Isabel Stevenson, and I'm president of the American Theater Wing. And although we are very well known for the Tony Awards, and I am justly proud of this very important and special award, which was created by the Wing to reward the people that have achieved a degree of excellence in the craft of the theater. However, the Wing is a year-round program. It has many programs that we do, and I'd like to tell you about some of them. Among the many programs is a hospital shows, which is just that. We bring theater to hospitals and nursing homes and aid centers so that those who can't come to the theater have a few minutes, half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is that their concentration can take, of the magic of theater and a little forgetfulness in their hard times. We also go into schools on Saturday mornings with our Saturday Morning for Children program. And that's a very special kind of program because on Saturday mornings, youngsters in the elementary school age line up to go to see a live show. It services the community as well because both parents and teachers work in this program with the children. And so there is a community effort there and a crossover between both generations. We hope that it will provide the audience for the future, not an audience that will go to the theater just because it's a special occasion or because there was a terrific review, but an audience that has grown up with the need of wanting to see live theater. And out of that program grew our new program, which is Introduction to Broadway. And I'm extremely proud of that program. It has just started, and within 3 months, there'll be over 5,000 school children, high school and junior high schools. We started the program with the Board of Education, with the cooperation of producers Schubert's and Jude Jansen. These young people have paid for part of a ticket. An affordable price was made, and they have come to a Broadway theater. They've come on matinees and they come on evenings, and it's a marvelous sight to see. And because of the Wing, the people in the theater have stayed afterwards, after the lights have gone down, have answered questions from these young people, have told them what it is to work in the theater, and even to the stage manager that there are other roles for them to look at in the theater, other careers as well for them to look for. And that's a program that I'm extremely proud of, and I'm hoping that in the fall we will go ahead with it and do triple the 5,000. And now, these seminars on working in the theater. Seminars grew out of the school that the Wing had for returning veterans after the Second World War. They came back to rehone their trade. And people like Jose Ferrer and Richard Rogers and Harold Prince had opened doors, and Kermit Bloomgarden on producing so they could go from one to the other, share knowledge. And young people like Charlton Heston and Tony Randall and Richard Howard Moss and people of that kind that were just emerging also learned their skills there. From that came the seminars. And they are shown 7 times a week on CUNY TV. And that is a graduate center at the City University of New York station. We're very pleased that we are here today. We're very pleased with this panel. And as always, it's filled with such knowledge and such skill that I hesitate to say anything more about the American Theater Wing except to say I'm indeed proud that we can call upon people like the panelists today. And I'm going to turn the panel over to our two co-chairpersons, Jean Dalrymple, who wears many hats. She is a producer, director, author, and very sturdy member of the board of directors of the American Theater Wing. Brendan Gill, who is critic and author, works at the New Yorker, I am told, but is witty, wise in many things as well as the theater. Mr. Gill and Miss Dalrymple, will you please take over now?
Very well.
Thank you.
To my astonishment, just a few minutes ago, I heard Isabel say that we are here in these improvised circumstances because of circumstances that were beyond her control. I have never known anything to be beyond Isabel's control. It is almost enough to make me believe in Emerson's bitter and frightening dictum that things are in the saddle and ride mankind. In any event, my side of this straight and narrow panel begins with Jonathan Pryce, who is starring in Miss Saigon at the Broadway Theater. He mentioned a few minutes ago that he was going to be leaving on December 7th, and I said December 7th, 1995, 96. No, 91. So commit whatever crime may be necessary for you to get to see Miss Saigon before that fatal date. And next to Jonathan is Mercedes Ruehl, who is starring in the Neil Simon Pulitzer Prize winning play Lost in Yonkers. It's very easy to be lost in Yonkers, but she finds herself there vividly at all times. And in a wonderful new play has Sarah Jessica Parker, as well as Mr. Rifkin, in it, The Substance of Fire, which is wonderfully, for all of us who believe in theater, doing extremely well. And it's wonderful to have such a play and such actors with us today. Jean, speak up.
Way downstage left is a good friend of all of us, Jane Alexander. Jane has been a star for as many years as I can remember. Not that she's that old, but just because I've been going to the theater so long that I caught her debut. And I've seen everything she did, and she's always wonderful, particularly in the show she's been doing, Shadowlands, at the Brooks Atkinson Theater. We all love her very much. And then I have next to her the great Topol. Everybody knows him. I don't have to go into a long biography of him. But here he is, and we're awfully honored to have him with us, Mr. Topol. And then we have an adorable girl whom I have loved for many years. And she is currently giving a tour de force performance in John Guare's 6 Degrees of Separation at Lincoln Center Theater. And that is no less than Stockard Channing. And right next to me, I'm glad to say, is Don Rifkin, who is now starring in John Robbins Bates's critically acclaimed play, The Substance of Fire, at the Playwrights Horizon. And before I go any further, what is the substance of fire?
Oh boy. What a way to start. Well, you know, the substance of fire can mean different things to different people. There's a symbolic event that happens at the very end of the play, which is a burning of something. And I think it signifies, for me, the presence and absence of passion in our daily lives and in our lives vis-a-vis our family and friends and the world in its entirety. Fire signifying the past, the present, the future, and it's, see the play.
There's also the supreme fire of our time,
Yeah.
which is the Holocaust.
Yeah.
But if there were 50 meanings, it's very difficult to get a good title for a play, one that is both memorable in itself in the simplicity of its words and then in the substance of the
But I think this
subtext.
particular father talks to his children about fire, and this guy has a passion for life and a passion for history and a passion for knowledge and a thirst for freedom. And I think when he talks about fire, that's what he's talking about. But you know, for all of us, it would mean something else, I suspect.
Yeah,
It's
well said.
It's a wonderful play for all the actors in it, but we were talking just between us before we began it today, Sarah and I, about the fact that this play is full of such intensity. Of course, it's about family life, which is always intense under the best of circumstances, but the sense that all the people in this play are at the edge, at the end of their tether, that something has to happen, and probably something awful may happen, is a thrilling thing to find nowadays. This is what people have always gone to the theater for, and this play delivers that wonderfully. And all of you do that so wonderfully. Is this the most intense play you were ever in, or not?
I think that it's been the most difficult, and it's been the most gratifying experience because the text is so strong. It sounds like a cliche, and I've been saying this to people, but you really do. You're constantly finding new things, and the stakes they get higher and higher every night because you become more and more familiar with this familial situation, and because we all like one another, it helps too. But it's very sad, and we come off stage and we go, "Oh God, man. Oh God, that was really horrible tonight." I mean, in the best possible way. But yeah, it's fair.
You can see when Sarah reaches for 3 or 4 tissues at the end of the first act,
run off stage.
we know where she's been.
Stockard Channing has a play not exactly like that, but it still takes a lot of what she mentioned. And that's true of all the plays you've been in, especially The House of Blue Leaves, which is my favorite of your plays.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
It's not really my play, it's John Greer's play.
I mean, the plays you've been in.
Well, thank you very
wrote.
much.
But would you tell us a little bit about it?
About 6 Degrees?
Yeah.
Well, I think the tricky thing about doing 6 Degrees, about the play, which is one of the reasons why it's so unusual, is that the text itself is immensely spare, and you have a few lines to establish a certain reality in time, a certain relationship, and then it raises practically every issue that we're concerned with these days, all in the space of an hour and a half for anyone who's seen it. And it goes by so quickly, and it was almost choreographed by Jerry Zaks. And the thing is, you have to be able, what we were saying earlier about, you come up with different things. One of the tricky things about 6 Degrees is you want to keep it alive in the moment. So certain times something will come to your mind, and you have to instantly make a decision whether it's appropriate or not, and not, sort of waggle, or wobble off the line. So there's this constant tension of moving the play forward and still being alive in the moment because of the way, John's writing is it's almost real. It's terribly heightened reality. It's a very almost unnatural kind of speech. But the illusion is that it's very natural. And when we first performed it in front of an audience at the previews, I was amazed at how instantly an audience went with it. I still am stunned by it, because when we were in rehearsal, it seemed immensely, almost abstract to me. It was like sort of doing Beckett or Ionesco or something. And it really is a tribute to Jerry that he was able to, make this so accessible to an audience, and to be in a play that's commercially successful, is so artistically out there on one level, is really an immensely interesting experience.
Yes,
It
but
goes like lightning.
Yeah, it does. But
Yeah.
people seem to go along for the trip. I don't think we leave a lot of people behind, and we've been running now over a year, like about a year. So you get a lot of people. You get a lot of people in seeing this play that maybe have never seen a play before. You get a lot of tourists coming in, And I think it's great that they sit there and they go along with it.
It's another family play, by the way, of the same kind
Definitely.
of intensity. And to me, it's been astonishing that when the children turn on the parents. The audience reaction, oh my God, you know, sitting staff like this. Everybody in the audience
it's just
has
out
gone
there.
through
It's
that.
this great wild rush of release of energy. I guess it exists in all these families in America.
All that is coming out all
sitting
at
on
once. It's
Tinder.
wonderful. But now, Jane, your play had to do something almost opposite, which is what is thrilling about theater, that this goes like lightning, your play goes like lightning. Your play deliberately had to have a different pace in order for us to become interested in characters who were by no means sympathetic at first. The man plainly not sympathetic, deliberately not sympathetic. So if any attempt had been to race through anything there, the audience would have been put at sea. It wouldn't have known how to deal with that. And so here in your play, what was exciting to see was how we were drawn into what would have seemed the most unlikely thing for us to care about, and we did care. So that's a completely different feeling that you have to have. And in this case, in both cases, it's both what the director is able to do, but also what the actors are capable of doing in pace themselves, which is every play different.
And what John Guerra wrote.
Oh yes, but but did you feel that with the audience too? Could you sense that increased engagement as it went along?
Yeah, but it was important for us as actors not to be so likable in the beginning.
No.
You know, because by the end it's also sad and desperate. By then you have to win them over, and if they started crying in the first act, we'd really be at sea.
Yeah, that's right.
So, by the way, Shadowlands did close 2 weeks ago, so nobody can see it anymore.
We'd like to feel that it's going on forever, though.
Well, thank you.
I saw it twice. It was really wonderful.
But
You were wonderful.
a lot of people must have thought that it was very brave even to bring it here because of the unlikelihood of people wanting to see as much sadness on stage. There are still enough Philistines in the world saying, oh, there's so much sorrow in the world, I don't want to go to see it on the stage.
But you know what I loved about it, and when I went to see it in London to see if I wanted to do it here, I was worried when I read the play that it could be maudlin and sentimental and all this, but when I saw Nigel, the way he was performing it, and Jane Lapatere did it in London when I first saw it, Nigel brought such interesting characteristics and behavior to the piece that I thought, that's what we have to develop. These are going to be real people, and we'll just put them out there, and the audience either goes with them or they won't. But what I loved about the play was it tackles things that all of us have experienced personally: pain, love, and suffering. I mean, what more can death, disease, and there isn't a person I would probably say that in the audience that in some way didn't have some similar experience somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about really today, wonderfully, is that there is plenty of room left for us in the theater, as there is in the novel or anything else, for the natural sorrows of life.
Don't you think the beginning of it was that everybody had read about it in the paper?
I don't think everybody reads the papers.
I do.
They look at pictures nowadays. Very little reading is actually done.
You'd be surprised.
Well, I had never read the biography, which I ought to have read, but I never had. So
I never read any C.S. Lewis, period.
Yeah.
And I still haven't read much. But no, that's not true. I did do some, but I wasn't a fan of his, and I'm still not much of a fan. I don't think it's really about C.S. Lewis per se. There's some recognition value for people who know about Lewis and Joy Davidman, but it's really a play it's a love story. It's about a man who was incapable of love finding, and somebody who makes him.
It's almost a frozen personality slowly thawing out. Oh my God, what a thing to do. It's tremendous to have that. But
Brandon?
I think, excuse me.
Talking about a man incapable of love, can we come down this side? No offense.
I can't imagine.
You can't imagine why.
Well, yes.
How is that as a problem for you as an actor?
Being incapable of love.
Being of a certain
There's a role in Saigon.
Well, he has a great love. Unfortunately, his love is the dream of America. That's what he's trying to achieve in Saigon. But that again is like Shadowlands is about. It's really a love story. It's about the power of what I got from Shadowlands anyway, was the joy and the power of love. And aspects of Miss Saigon are just that. It's someone's emotional, life, whether it be for another human being, it's for a country, it's for an ideal. It's from there.
Is this sort of across the board? You then find that almost every topic we have is an expression of love in a mutilated form, so that the miser, for example, would be expressing love, but it would be through the love of money. So pretty soon it all cancels out on that level. Then you have to find something else in the role. That's why I think the harshest comedies are about those people whose love consists of an objectified thing out there rather than a fellow human being.
Yeah.
But to risk a fellow human being is pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
I
But
think
humor
it's
and,
wonderful
sorry.
that you've made such a fabulous character out of that. And I wonder if a lot of it was in the script, or did you make it up?
Say you made it up, John.
Well, a lot of it I did make up.
Right, that's right.
And I hope the check's in the post. It's everything is that. When I first got the script, it was in French, and I couldn't make head and tail of it, and I didn't really know which part I was being offered, and I'm not really young enough for the GI, and maybe I don't know, but this part doesn't look very good on page, the engineer. So it's what I brought to it. It's expanded it. But but that's the rehearsal process, and you create and you add a few lines here and there.
And the making of a thing, which takes place, nobody in the audience is supposed to know how a thing is actually made in that way, because the contributions ought not to be able to be identifiable after they have been done.
No, but it's always surprising that to other people how much contribution we as actors make in the rehearsal process to a play, especially a new piece of work, and especially something which has the scope of Miss Saigon, where it's up for grabs. Nobody knows what it's supposed to be, so you can create and build, and a lot of it's down to the actors.
Were you given directions from the beginning of rehearsals, or did you, once having given the barest of directions, did you then build on that and create what we now see?
Well, a lot of what we did in London was improvised initially. You would improvise scenes, and I think Nick Heitner's job, which I find a lot of directors' work, is to guide and shape rather than to lead. They use them as a sounding board, really. And what Nick Heitner did in Miss Saigon, which his greatest strength is the assembly of large numbers of people on the stage. But I think the actors' work that we do for ourselves.
Did I read that Mr. Bates, as playwright, intended you to be playing that part?
I think you did read that.
Because that is an old-fashioned thing that people used to do, as Rostand would have written Cyrano for Coquelin. That hasn't happened as much in recent years, and even though Coward was always writing parts for his friends to play. But it does make a difference when you are the person who is known to be able to do a certain thing. That gives the playwright an opportunity to push.
I don't know that I was known to do that. I just, that when Robbie wrote the play, he wrote it with me in mind because he'd seen me work, and he had an idea for this character, and sort of had my rhythms, and who knows? I mean, I don't know. I mean, he just thought about me when he was writing it, and intended for me to play it.
What's so peculiar about that is that the character is so unlike you. You know, I mean, it's amazing that someone would write with a person in mind and write something so polar opposite of a personality. You know,
Well, I think, you know, we all have dark sides to us, and I think Robbie, in some sense, knew that I had this dark side.
Well, I'm not
didn't know
suggesting
it.
that you don't have a dark side.
It can be very difficult when, 15, 16 years ago, I did a play called Comedians that Trevor Griffiths ostensibly wrote for me to play. And it was one of the most difficult roles I've ever had to get a handle on, because I didn't have this image of myself, and I didn't it was supposedly so close to me I couldn't see it. It was a long time. It was ages before I could start to work on it. Whereas if it's something completely away from you, you can get hold of it a lot quicker. I mean, the engineer was something I could grab onto very quickly and easily.
Now, Mercedes, we haven't asked you that question about to what extent you again are a character in a play who is the opposite of Frozen. You are dying to be loved, bursting with continuously unrequited love. But is there a difference between the role as you first saw it and how it developed as the play went along through rehearsal? What happened in that respect in your case?
When I first read it, I couldn't see what it was. It seemed miles away from me. It seemed beyond reach, and I kept thinking, I had the play for about a month and a half before I had to meet with Neil Simon and read for him. And when I first read it, I thought, so what do I do? Adapt a baby talk? How do you do this? So I put it away for a long time, and then suddenly the day came up to meet with him. And the night before, I thought, well, you better figure out something. I'd never met him before. I was terrified. And so I stayed up for a good part of that night. And one little thing that tipped it off, I was thinking, how do you play? And I thought she came in around 13 years old. She checked in around 13 in terms of emotional and mental development, or at least intellectual development. I think her mental abilities probably are the same as anybody's, but certain learning disabilities and characteristics of her life so far have kept her in this childlike condition. But I thought 13, that's where she is. And I thought, what's a good metaphor for an adult with a 13-year-old brain? And I came with Tom Hanks, who's played my son in Big. And I thought, that's it. She actually can sound quite adult, can move along, can move thoughts along. And it sort of opened something for me, and when I went to read it for Neil the next day, I had, luckily, miraculously, taken that ball and run with it and discovered somebody who essentially stayed the same throughout the rehearsal period. But the character that I thought was way out there was really 6 inches away. I just had to move my foot over a little and step into her. So it was a revelation.
It's intensely expressive as you make the role. But now, was Simon startled by what you have been able to do like that, or what was his response?
Well, I think he was a little surprised at the intensity of what he had written, because it's been my experience that you can't actually bring an intensity. The writing is there, the writing supported it, all the way up to the end of the emotional trajectory. And if you try to go beyond what a writer has written, you generally look like you're overacting. So the writing was there to support it all. But I think he was maybe a little bit surprised at what he had written and how far it could go in terms of grief.
Yeah. Because that play is everybody in that play is mutilated, and then you're writing a play about entirely mutilated people, and it's funny. You know, it's an amazing thing. This is what a playwright can do.
Comedy, I think, has a dark root.
Yeah. But you were able to be open and expressive inside the absence of growth of adulthood. You were still giving all that out and having it rebuffed. So it becomes a very touching role.
Well, it stands apart because the checks of adulthood, the personal checks and editing that come with adulthood, don't affect Bella.
So much easier to be little boys.
And you know, the audience is so happy when she does that. You know, you feel it. They're saying, oh, thank God. You know, and she does save the situation.
Well, it's also a very archetypal transaction. It's a child breaking away from a parent and becoming self-responsible, becoming independent. It's a very small, a very universal story, but it's the story that all folk tales and all fairy tales allude to. It's one of the great stories. If there are 7 great stories in the universe, as some people allude to, that's got to be one of them. So universally, people respond to this great ancient folk tale, this story.
Should really lead you to the family, to Topol at this point, because if you're talking about the family and talking about this, surely no one epitomizes what he is doing more than Topol in Fiddler on the Roof. It's about family again.
I would be very disappointed if you hadn't done exactly what you did. I was
You
very
did.
happy.
Topol, what about you and family in that play?
Well, I certainly
Yeah,
cannot
Waterworld.
claim that I created the part. I had the privilege and the advantage of watching a genius creating that part, Zero Mostel. I didn't think it was a good part for me, because I actually turned down the part when it was offered to me. I went to see it and I said, that's not a part for me, it'll never work in Israel. And I was mistaken, it ran for 3 years. I then had the opportunity to see my teacher, Mulke Rodensky, playing the part, and he really made me love the part. And he certainly made me realize that a very important rule in the theater, that if they laugh too much in the first act, they won't cry in the second. And I'm trying to keep to that rule. But as I said, this part was created by a genius who made a lot of room on stage for all the Tevias who came after him. And I'm very grateful to my teacher who steered me in the right direction, which is suitable, I hope, for me.
Did you always have one name?
No, I still have 2 names.
But when did you decide to have one name?
My name is Chaim Topol, and I never dropped my first name. I call myself Chaim Topol. When I went to London, where I opened it, where I opened Fiddler in 1967, it was very difficult for English people to pronounce C-H-A-I-M. I mean, I was called Chime and Chime, and then, or Chame, and then the producers decided that Topol is easy. Still, I have to say that even with Topol, I have problems. I mean, when I came here, it was Topol and Topol, and I hope that by now they know how to pronounce it.
I didn't know whether there was a European tradition of one names. I was trying to think of other cases like that. Usually it happens by accident, that if a person becomes famous enough, he may only have a first name, like Tallulah, or where Bankhead became unnecessary as a last name.
Well, it's very strange. I mean, I wish we talked about theater, but we'll talk about my name for a second. I cannot explain it, but my father, who is not a famous actor, he was a plasterer. I mean, he is a member of a kibbutz now. And he was also, although his name is a very simple name, his first name is Jacob, was always called Topol. So were my sisters, I mean, always called Topol before they married, although their names are very, the first names are very simple. I cannot explain why people prefer to say Topol rather than Jacob or Shosh or Chaim. I cannot explain it.
Mm-hmm. It's related in my mind, or in my unconscious, to Topaz as in the play and character and all of that. But that wouldn't make sense either, because that's too little known.
Yeah.
But, no, there must be some intrinsic magic there that you've happened upon.
Well,
and it looks wonderful in print because of the repetition of the vowels and consonants. It's just nice.
I think it's a
Fortunate man.
name. Fascinating name, you know.
Yeah.
And it's one that can't be forgotten. And I think he's quite right to use it. And Haim is a difficult word to say in the proper. Say it the way it's supposed to be
Chaim.
said.
Chaim, like L'chaim, to life.
Jonathan, can you say Haim in English? Do you have a problem with?
Welsh, yeah.
You're Welsh.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah,
So
Welsh
sure
and
you
Dutch
can
don't
say
have
it.
problems with that.
Closer.
Very easy to say.
As we say,
Yes, I would
Yachida.
think so.
And I only ever use Mercedes.
I've been trying to say L'chaim for years, and it never sounds right.
Well, it's masculine. Say L'chaim. It's not L'chaim, it's L'chaim. There you go.
We had a famous character in America who played the Count of Monte Cristo for many, many years, Eugene O'Neill's father, James O'Neill, and he pretended that it was the burden and cross of his life that he had to carry it all those years, decade after decade. But in point of fact, there was no law saying that he had to play it for that many years. But have you approached that point where you begin to think, is my life to be devoted?
No, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the fact that I'm being asked. I've been asked since 1967 to play the part. I did it for a year on the London stage at the Her Majesty's, and then I did a film in 1970. And since, I mean, producers asked me to do it again and again, and I refused to do it. In 1983, when a producer agreed to do it for a limited season of 3 months, I said, okay, I'll try and do it. And I enjoyed it tremendously. The season was extended, and we ran for 6 months at the Apollo Victoria. And I really enjoyed every night, every performance. I found that as an actor, when I did it in 1967, I was 30 years old, 31 years old. And I found that I had to imagine, as actors do, what it would be being in a situation of giving your daughter away, or whatever the situation that we have to play. And then in 1983, I found that I've experienced quite a lot of the situations that I'm going through in the play. And more so now. This is the third time that I'm playing it. And I really find it very rewarding, not to put so much energy in playing the age, because in 1967 I thought that a man of 55 is really very old. And I developed a technique how to close muscles and how to make myself look old and how to sound old and all that, which I certainly don't need to do now. But also the experiences. At 1967, when I sang to Golda, "Do You Love Me?" I thought that 25 years being married is an eternity. Now I've been married for 35 years, so Golda and Tevye look to me like two babies, you know, youngsters. I actually have to reverse the acting now and think a little younger than I am. So it's very, and I know the material very well. It's not the first play that I'm doing again. I did Othello twice, and I found it very rewarding to play the second time. I did Caucasian Chalk Circle twice, and I found it very rewarding because, and not that I was criticizing my first interpretation, but I was kind of building on top of the first interpretation, kind of developing it as a more matured and experienced person in life and on stage.
What about going back and playing Othello again?
Actually, it's in the cards, and I'll probably do it the end of this year.
You have a really noble voice, which would be just perfect for Othello, because he needs that noble voice. Otherwise, he's such a terrible character. He's so vain, so conceited. But the voice somehow and the music.
I hope to do it at the Habima Theatre by the end of this year.
Oh, that would be great. But will you be eventually, having played Tevye so long, in the Guinness Book of Records or not? I don't know whether anybody has played.
No, I don't think so. I think that our bless his memory, Jerome Ostel, did it much longer, and I think that bless his memory, Herschel Bernardi, who did it twice as many as I did. Yeah.
Jessica, what do you draw upon in your youthful age, in your young age? Is it difficult to play an actress?
No, it's what's peculiar about playing this part is, first of all, her name is Sarah, which is, well, I wouldn't think before doing it that it would be strange, but that's what's most peculiar about playing this part is it's such a different person than me. It's not. I don't think of her as an actress. I think of her as this person in this aggravated situation who just desperately wants things to be okay, and she sort of leaves what she does at the door for a good reason, primarily because her father so has so little respect for what she does that she, it becomes so little of who she is. So I don't think of her as an actress. I think of her as this very young person who desperately wants her father to love her.
Now, in the case that if you were playing Shakespeare, you couldn't ask Shakespeare to change the name of the character, but you could have asked Mr. Bates to do so.
Yes, and in fact, her name had been something else. When I first saw the play at Naked Angels, a theater company where the show started at its inception, was a one-act, and I believe her name was Alana. Her name was
Actually, there were two. Yeah, there were two. There was a workshop at Naked Angels where it started, and then there was a workshop at the Long Wharf.
Right.
The Long Wharf was Alana, and at Naked Angels it was. Do you remember Iva? Meg.
Oh,
Megan.
which is very peculiar.
It was Megan.
But
yeah.
I felt like, look, they've asked me to do this play. I'm going to do it, whatever the name is. You know what I mean? I don't care. I'll learn to work with it. And I didn't think it would bother me, but it doesn't even sound like Sarah. It sounds like somebody else's name because she's not Sarah Jessica. She's Sarah Geldhart.
It can work. I was just sent a cast list of a movie of the week starring Victoria Principal, where a pimp. They'd named the pimp Jonathan Pryce.
Wow. Well, I guess I'll embrace my name.
Yeah. Well, you're a three-name person. That's,
yes.
That's also, I think, fairly rare, isn't it now? Mostly women novelists in the old days all had three names, but I don't know whether, actresses did too.
I don't know.
It became a thing to do. You go from one name to three.
Could we draw upon you to ask about what you draw upon for this? Because it's such a sustaining role that you have there. It's a difficult role.
I don't really, it's funny, I don't really know. I think that one of the factors of working in the theater that we haven't mentioned, is, which Jonathan actually touched on, was the whole rehearsal process. Because when I first read the piece, I don't think my impression of Ouisa, also a strange name, Ouisa, I don't know, I've never known anyone called Ouisa. If you read a play, and literally something like that will bounce out at your face, and you find yourself saying, what is his name? And you say, no, I got to read this play, I can't. And because you don't know what it's going to look like, who the other actors are going to be, whatever. And when I first read 6 Degrees, I really didn't have any expectation of the resonance that would come off the piece. I didn't know who this person was. I was sort of thrown into the situation. The company was sort of waiting for me, and I kind of went along for the ride. I must confess, I never dreamed it would grow the way it did, but I think, frankly, that kind of surrender is a really great advantage to have in the rehearsal process, because what happened was I just let it happen to me. I was totally an inductive procedure. I didn't sort of go home and think up things about Ouisa. As a matter of fact, one of the characteristics of the play is you have no idea how old these people are, except for there's certain bits of information about them, but it's an unusual piece that way. And really, people get their information from the moment-to-moment interaction of the characters. As I mentioned earlier, even though it's a really tightly choreographed thing, with Courtney Vance and John Cunningham, we work out this sort of language of of intonation, of how you talk to someone, a lot of indirect action and whatever. So frankly, the character of Ouisa, for example, sort of emerged from what she does, because I believe that acting is very much about interacting and listening, and the audience makes up sometimes, in a piece like this, especially who the character is. And, you know, so I can't say that. I mean, I can tell you what Ouisa may be thinking every moment, but I haven't come to make a lot of conclusions about her, because I think the nature of the piece requires that you don't. And I'm very fortunate to have these, especially these two particular actors that I work with so closely, you know, to create this reality with. Because in reality, we don't, you know, define ourselves. Maybe in the middle of the night we can't sleep, we sort of define ourselves lying in bed, you know. But basically, that doesn't operate on a stage. You know, it's about creating that life. Especially there's no set really. There's no, you know, we only have.
Jane, do you have any ideas about what she's talking about?
Oh, say yes, Jane. Please say yes.
Yeah, sure.
I thought you were way over on left stage.
But I think what Stockard was saying is also very important for play.
Well, what
all right. I thought.
No, I wanted to. Let me hear, please, Jean, the rest of what Stockard wants to say.
No, that's really, you know, when we're talking about the characters, we're talking about, you know, playing someone. I mean, as I said, it grew up very inductively, and a lot of things are probably happening that I'm not aware of, that an audience would name, or you guys would name if you've seen it, you know, that I may not be aware of. Because I think it's sometimes very important not to draw too many conclusions about a character, because then you start commenting on the essence of that character, especially in the long run.
That's what I meant.
Mercedes was saying the same thing, too. I think I found what Mercedes said about, at first you think that the character is way out there, and then you find it's 6 inches next to you. Yeah. But that's part of the process, isn't it? And it's a strange process. And I work so slowly that in Shadowlands, even though I went into it in July in London, and then we went back into rehearsal in New York in October, I didn't hit my stride until the end of January. I mean, I don't know if that's true for a lot of other people, but it took me that long to find the character right next to me or in me.
Yeah, I thought so.
And I try not to make comments on it. As you say, I also responded to what Stockard said about lying awake at night and sort of defining the character, and then you wake up in the morning and you say, what was that all about? And you chuck it.
Right. Yeah, it's very important to know what not to use. One thing that's unusual about 6 Degrees, which I'd be pretty about, when I say about the rehearsal process, is that the way the show looks, what Paul Gallo's lights and Tony Walton set and all the rest of it, and even when you might be looking at costumes, it's so much, it's like a living piece of sculpture. The visual aspect of it is so extraordinary. There's so many lighting cues and shifts around. And what we did, which is very unusual, is that, you know, we have the thing of 10 out of 12 days, where usually it's right before you go into preview, everybody's like working 10 out of 12 hours and crazy. We went into 10 out of 12 2 weeks before previews, and we were in the theater having run-throughs with lights for 2 weeks before an audience ever came in. So we were like a band. We were like, you know, we had the cues down absolutely like that, so you knew where you were standing and all that, and you had to learn the lines and get into it. And I worked slowly as well, and I found this almost depressive at first. But then I had to just learn the lines by rote, if you will, so you could be there, because Ouisa rarely leaves the stage, for the other actors and have the rhythms going. And the interaction came last. The little bits of character and stuff came last. And I didn't know you could do that, because I've always worked the other way. And it was amazing to find out you could totally reverse your process of working. You couldn't stop and say, no, I don't know what I'm feeling here. No, you couldn't do that, because you had to get on with it. But the life still grew. And sometimes the life, you know, you solve a problem of a certain moment way down the line. It could be 2 months after you open. It could, you know, and you've got to have patience to hope that it will come and know that you're still okay. And that's a very weird thing about theater that can happen. You know, that you can't. There's a certain point you say, I've got it, but it could happen anywhere along the line. It could happen the first day of rehearsal. It could happen a year into a run. But that can be frustrating, but it's interesting.
It's very much like the experience of doing a musical.
Yeah.
Which I'd never done before, and I'd in rehearsals always been used to creating my own space and my own time, and and even taking that into performance. So that in a longish run, you could switch things round about by changing the timing of things. But I found that rehearsing a musical, it was really, really difficult, because I was having to think and move and act and do everything within somebody else's time frame.
Absolutely, exactly.
But instead of it being inhibiting, I actually found it very freeing and releasing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could actually get on with thinking for myself while somebody else was creating.
And then did you find that the the thoughts came afterwards. I
Yeah.
mean, once you
Yeah.
got into the rhythm of the piece, this stuff would arrive. You didn't stay at that point of just technical, you know, the rhythms. Just other stuff will come in. And I agree. I found the same thing. I was totally surprised that you could do it that way.
Because when I'd done Shakespeare in the past, I've always resisted using the iambic pentameter. I've always tried. I thought the thoughts were more important than the rhythms, and would always cut across it. And if it happened on the beat, it very often was accidentally. It wasn't nothing to do with my intention. And this is just a roundabout way of saying it. Maybe when I go back to doing Shakespeare now, maybe I'll use that, because it is it's a very supportive thing to have.
Well, also, when you
You have
break
Topol
stuff
for
down too much, you lose
Othello.
the rhythm of the whole. You know, sometimes the meaning arrives from from a whole. For example, that's an awful thing, and you have the first run through in rehearsal, and you've these marvelous scenes, and they're just divine. You think you're just so great, and the other acts are great, and then you go through this first run through, and it's all this sort of mess of you know, self-indulgent pile that doesn't sort of hold together, you know. And there's something to be said for having to look at the whole and getting something up to speed. It's almost like sort of physics, you know, something up to speed has a certain life of its own. And you're probably talking about the iambic pentameter of the speeches there too. I mean, to get them both together at the same time, it's truly great. But sometimes they don't, you know, you got to do both.
It can work against you too, because in London, I completely lost my lines during the middle of a song, and wanted to stop, and and just sort of fluffed my way through it. And I looked down at the conductor, and he was going, and they'd gone. And I just came in about, you know, a few lines later. But they didn't know.
Terrifying.
I discovered this problem in doing Moliere, Richard Wilbur translation of Tartuffe, where you're talking in rhyming couplets, and if you go up in that, how do you improvise in rhyming couplets? And I think too that actors, like other artists, view maybe the first half or the first few years, the apprenticeship of their work and their art. They view form as confining a prison, something that has to be broken. And then you reach that point where you realize that form, like a sonnet for a writer, form is liberating. Form is to be used for liberation, not to be viewed as a prison. So that the pace, the galloping pace of those rhyming couplets, when you hit the rhyming word at the end of each sentence actually makes the humor burst out of the thought. It doesn't. It's not the prison you thought it was, but boy, does it take a while to get to that point.
The hardest thing in the world to do that.
A wonderful explanation of that. Can anybody else follow up on that? Because I think it's a marvelous explanation of the rhythm.
Well, I like very much that the discipline that the music or the rhymes require. I mean, and you, within that discipline, have to develop whatever you want to develop, whether it's thoughts, feelings, or whatever it is, but it gives you kind of a canvas. Says, this is the size, paint here, what you have to paint. And I find it very challenging and therefore very rewarding when you, within the canvas, succeed to deliver what you want to deliver. Because of my experience of the fourth production now of Fiddler, I find other very interesting things that colleagues that have been changed, whether it's your daughter now, you play I mean, you have another family. This is my fourth family now. And each one of them brings to the stage different qualities, different chemistry, different rhythms, different height, physically. I mean, suddenly, I used to turn when my daughter would say so-and-so, I used to turn and look here to her eyes, and suddenly they are here, or there. And of course, the rhythm of her speech and the feelings that she delivers and conveys. And I find those adjustments very interesting. I mean, they really keep you on your toes, because you have kind of to throw away all that you did before and actually rebuild the part and the role. And it's amazing how weights in the play change because of your colleagues. Because, I mean, if if you had a Perchik, let's say, that really, Perchik is the revolutionary guy who comes in and wants to change the world, to better the world, and he has fire in him that really influences you. You go along with him and you say, yes, yes, I mean, this is the... And you actually, I mean, I find that as Tevye now, I developed kind of an envy, a jealousy at this guy now, because he gives me that fire, and I say, yes, I wish I were his age, and I would join him, and I would join the revolution as a Tevye, where in other Tevyes, I didn't envy them so much. So really, I mean, you can get a lot from your colleagues, and this is what you were talking about interacting, and there's no doubt that interacting is very, very important.
I was thinking when you were talking, I watched one of these seminars a few weeks ago, and it was the one with Tyne and...
Tyne Daly.
Yeah, and they were talking about listening, actors listening, and how much energy that takes. And I think Irene Worth was maybe talking about listening. The other night in our play, there's this scene at the end of the first act when one of the sons has this incredibly long monologue that's very disturbing to all of us. We're four of us on stage, a father and the three children, but it's very disturbing to all of us. And Patrick Breen, who's this incredibly brilliant actor, talks with great fire and great passion about his inner world and his past. And we all listen, and we're all listening so intently that I thought I couldn't ever listen any more than I'm listening. And last week, there's a moment when we're both off stage together, he came up to me, and we have our little rituals. I go to one bathroom, he goes to his bathroom, we have water, and we never talk. We've been doing this for 2 months. And he said, Ronnie, I'm dizzy. I got very dizzy on stage, and please look out for me during this monologue, because I'm nervous. And all I could think about when my beloved son is talking to me about how I affected him in his life was, Patrick, what's going on? Are you going to faint? And I listened with such ferocity and such intensity that I thought, how did I ever think that I was listening before? It was incredible. And of course he got through it, but I thought, do I have to learn? There's so much to learn. It was incredible.
Are you continuing learning? Are you acting? Are you taking lessons now?
Oh, I don't take lessons now, but I hope I'm learning.
Well, I'm
but
sure
I'll take
you
lessons if you think there's a good teacher out there.
Which leads me, Brendan, I usually ask Brendan to do this, but you're amiss today, of where you come from in order to have this discipline and to know what it is to react. What's your background? Where did you start in the theater? Did you study at university? I'll start with you, Jane.
Not really, no. I did, but I didn't. I had to repudiate most of whatever I learned from teachers. I didn't think the teaching was that good, and I didn't have a lot of teachers, and then I got into working situations. But I was fortunate that I went to theaters outside the city, and I was working 40 weeks a year in and year out, for quite a long time early on in my career, and I learned everything from the audience and the great directors I was working with.
Should we go on, Topol? Hi.
Yeah, well, hi. I was very fortunate to have had very good teachers. In fact, what we did when we started as a satirical theater, and then we realized that unfortunately we were successful overnight, and it's going to spoil us. And we were sort of full of energy, but no professionalism whatsoever. But we realized it, and we hired teachers from the Habima and Stanislavski's disciples. And we worked with them. We had a very good voice teacher, a Bulgarian voice teacher. She was wonderful. And then my most important teacher is really Cicely Berry. I'm sure that Jonathan knows very well. And she's been my teacher for the last 25 years.
I'm going to stop you right now. And I find always I'm stopping you as part of these seminars, because we're going to take a break, and so that you can stretch and you can move about, very smartly move about here, very carefully. And we'll come back then for questions from the audience, and I hope that you've been listening and you have many questions, because I know I have too. So don't go far away from here. We're back at the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater. And this seminar is on the performance. And what a splendid group of people we have for the panel. And I had to interrupt them just as we were talking about what it really is to work in the theater, where you get the experience, how much the audience gives you, and what does the person that you're working against give you.
I want to ask Stockard Channing about playing with different actors. You were so perfectly marvelous with Jim Dale. Did that mean something to you? Did that help you?
When I did Joe Egg.
Yes, when Joe Egg, you were absolutely superb.
Thank you.
And so was he, of course. But it was a
No, it's funny because I
thing.
originally did that part, Joe Egg, with Richard Dreyfuss.
Yes.
We did it at Williamstown and at Long Wharf, and then 4 years later to do it with another actor. As Topol was saying, I think that you just, with a certain passage of time, there's almost a gestation process that happens about the material, that when you return to it, you build on the previous performance. So that's one level. And then when you're dealing, especially, this is really a love story between two people, it's a marriage, even though it's about this damaged child that's in the middle of it all. I remember very, very clearly when, Arvin Brown, his director, and I have been trying to get this together for like 4 years, and there have been various people that I've discussed with and everything, and Richard was wonderful in the role, and I always felt it'd be very difficult to work with anybody else, but that, that happens. And I remember very clearly sitting down in Jim's house, reading through the material for the first time. We read it aloud, and it was so exciting because it almost is like life. You think that you're never going to be in love again, and then you meet someone, and you fall in love with a whole other kind of person. I mean, it's... and the relationship was totally fresh because you embraced what was new. And even in 6 Degrees, we've had, a lot of people go on vacation or they take leaves and whatever. And I've had 3 people playing my daughter in the play. And it's a very, you have to, very brief little interludes, but you have to make clear relationships. And I said, it's like I have 3 daughters. Yeah. And now I'm talking to this daughter. And, and last week I was talking to that daughter. And I think if you don't project on the other person the demands that were fulfilled, by the actor or actress before, if you're able to start as fresh as you can within the context of the reality of the piece. And sometimes it's more difficult than other times, but that is, that's so core to it all.
That seemed like a real union between you and Jim Dale.
Yeah, I know. It was a very fortuitous.
Wonderful, wonderful performance.
But in the case of the John Guare play, what's remarkable about that is something you also touched on before, which is that it could be played for 100 years by all kinds of different actors because of John's having left the characters for you people to fulfill in the way that you want to do. As you say, there's almost nothing specific
in this play.
In that play.
No, I mean, he doesn't. The scenes are rather very fractured. It's almost like sound bites or something. And as I said earlier, I was amazed that the audience went with this from the beginning because it's a very unusual kind of way of writing a play. I mean, it's extremely unusually written play, the whole structure, the form of it. And I'm stunned that people are, embrace it the way they do.
But it's almost the ideal play that is as open as that to that many possible kinds of both kinds of.
But there is a definite limitation within the rhythm of it because there's a certain momentum. You have to hit certain peaks of response in an audience to get them to the next stage. And Topol said they laugh too much in the first act, they don't cry in the second. Actually, in our play, we find the reverse is true. If they don't really go crazy in the middle and laugh, we don't get them to calm down and go with the strangeness of the end. And it's really a 3-act play in an hour and a half.
And what happens in respect to the fact that it goes all the way through without a break? Is that very different from your usual experience or not?
I think so. That combined with the demands of the rhythm of the piece, the almost musical demands. I mean, you get on that train and you do not get off, Because
it is it's a thrilling idea, which we've always been able to do in other forms, of having a continuous action like that, going right straight. And the novelist Simonal said that a novel should be like a blow in the face. And that's the way this play
I
is,
definitely
like a blow in
think
the
it
face.
is. I think it's, yeah.
And when you have the interruption of an act, in the old days, 3 acts, when you had to come back twice and come out. But to have a blow in the face is what everybody dreams of doing.
We're about to open this to questions, and you might as well get on your mark, because I'm sure that there's going to be baffling, interesting, and I hope helpful questions for everybody. Would you please come along?
This is for Miss Channing. Both you and Miss Alexander said that you work slowly, and I was just wondering what pressures that causes on you from, like, the other actors, the director. And one more little bit. And as the character evolves and changes throughout the run of the show, like, how do they react to that, the director and the actors?
All right, I'll start and then Jane can do her. The first part of the question, I did a play a few years ago called Women in Mind, in which the play actually existed in this woman's mind, and it was an Alan Ayckbourn piece. And anyway, I had that thing of having to be in, we had a standard amount of 4 weeks rehearsal, and there was a lot of material, and everyone had to talk to this central character. And so it was a very oppressive thing, I'm sure, to them, because I only was working slowly, but I was working in my usual conventional way, which I didn't want to really learn the words until after I knew what I was talking about, as we mentioned earlier, and what I was trying to say. And then I had to stop feeling guilty, because I'd be riddled with guilt that I wasn't sort of word perfect the next day, and that took so much energy out of me. I had to stop that. So you just put one foot in front of the other and hope, and luckily they were all very nice to me and tolerated this. And probably the worst of it was when I was feeling guilty, because the last thing you need is some actor coming into rehearsal saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know my lines." You waste a lot of energy that way. You do what you can do. And it all came together at the end and turned out pretty well. But, it is a problem when you work solely as I do. But in the course of the run, I'm really schizophrenic about this myself. I work very slowly at the beginning, and then when I lock in, I pretty much stay within this tunnel. I find out the tunnel I'm in, and I can go like that, but I don't like going too far out once I'm in performance because of the whole thing of other actors and everything. I mean, I don't think I'm exactly, mimicking myself, but it's almost like a signature, Okay. Anyway, but Jane hasn't answered this question.
Mine is very quick. Nigel Hawthorne had been playing Shadowlands for about 11 months in England. And when I first came in, he said, "Oh, he's a charming Englishman." And he said, "Well, that's just lovely, dear, just lovely," and nothing. Well, as time went on and I got more laughs and more tears from the audience, he said, "Jane, darling, do you think maybe you could just do this or do that?" He was really put off a little bit, but then we had to sit down and talk about it, and my parameters, just like Stockard says, were confined, and then there wasn't too much shifting around.
Thanks.
My question is to you, Miss Alexander, but it could be to anyone on the panel. In Shadowlands, you were portraying a historical character. How is your approach to the role different than if you're working on a fictional character? What is your responsibility to the actual person?
Okay, I've played a lot of historical characters, not so much on stage, but certainly a lot in film. When I play somebody like Eleanor Roosevelt, who the public has an image, they know who she is, they know what she sounds like, I feel that I do have a responsibility to somehow try to find some way to assume certain characteristics. When I'm playing somebody like Joy Davidman, who in fact is entirely different looking than I was at all, I don't feel the same responsibility. The public doesn't know her. So in fact, I just went with what the playwright gave me, and he said he extrapolated a lot that wasn't in her life either.
Okay, this question is addressed to the entire panel. How is your job different with a new original script as opposed to doing something that's established? And if you had the choice, which one would you prefer to work on?
Well, I've done very few original scripts lately, but I tend to approach any new piece of work as if it was a new script and as if I'd never seen it before, and a lot of Shakespeare I haven't seen before. So I don't really make that kind of definition between them. I think so you bring a kind of freshness to it. With an entirely new script, like Miss Saigon is the newest script I've done for years, apart from film or TV scripts, you have a freedom to have some kind of input into it so that things are changed and it grows around you and around the company. but I think we all approach it freshly each time, don't we?
Yeah.
Lads?
Yes.
I see a lot of head nodding.
I think with a new role, you are the one who's going to establish certain parameters, and they haven't been established before, and so you can go wherever you want with it, and there are no predefined. There are no predefinitions of what this character can be. No, so if you look at Masha in Three Sisters, you remember, first of all, the great performances that you've seen. And you have unconsciously some things to get beyond. Maybe some reading, some attitudes, some stuff that you had seen that you might want to put in to your own performance that are derivative of someone else's. And you know you're going to have to go through that and beyond it into something else. So that there are maybe some problems, certainly with a man doing Hamlet. With fear and trepidation, any man approaching Hamlet, I suppose. And maybe for a woman it would be something like Medea, or one of the great Ibsen heroines, you know. So that unconsciously, you've got to get through some unconscious barricades sometimes with the great established roles.
Well,
but I do believe you have to finally approach them all the same way. Yeah. You are creating someone who has never been seen before.
Well, I think that's very important. I think with the classics, which is done in England so much more frequently than done here, they do approach it each time with a fresh eye to it. I find that the artists take smaller roles in order to be able to get another view of what they're doing within the cast. And Americans are now doing that too, I think, with the resident companies and the small off-Broadway and off-Broadway. They're going with these companies, wonderful, talented people, in order to do something else and to stretch themselves just one bit more, which is pretty much what we've heard on the panel today, this stretching of yourself, this constant trying.
I think when as Jonathan and Mercedes both said, that whenever you approach a role, you approach it as if obviously it's never been done before. I think the difference is that you do have the freedom to create without parameters. I mean, there are no parameters. When you started creating your Ouisa, you know, there's never been a Ouisa before. It's the first one. I remember I was doing Three Sisters at the Taper, and at the same time, on television was a British production of Three Sisters, and some wonderful British actor was playing the part that I was playing at the Taper, and people actually compared us, which was so silly, you know, and, which also put a lot of pressure on me. But
there's another element, though, to this question, which is when you do a contemporary new play, you deal with rewrites, and that's something, you know, most of the plays I've done over the past few years have been out of English plays that have been done, music, whatever. And last year I had the interesting experience of doing a Neil Simon play called Jake's Women, in which there was a tremendous amount of rewriting. I mean, tremendous, which never came into town. And when I did 6 Degrees right after, there was a very minimal amount of rewriting. But in terms of creating a character within a production, you have to deal, when you're doing a new play, with the play that you end up with could be very, very different than the play you first read, which is a totally different problem than it just, you know, dealing with interpretation of a text in a new way.
Thank you. Do you want to ask?
This is to Mercedes
Can you
Ruehl.
speak up?
This is to Mercedes Ruehl, but a few people I think were talking about it. Pertaining to the freedom you come to discover in the discipline of the dramatic situation and the characters or even the beat of the words and interaction between players, does your experience as an actor carry over into your personal life, or do they rhyme in any way, or do they, is it...
Have I started speaking in couplets?
No, not that so much as when you return to the discipline of the dramatic situation, and talking about that as being kind of a releasing thing. Does it in any way carry over into personal life or your experience outside of the theater?
I'll tell you, in this, I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but I have discovered that in order to do 8 shows a week of a fairly demanding role, that a new discipline has to enter your life. I was just talking about this with Topol between when we were taking our break. You have to take care of your voice. You have to get sleep. If you have a love of wine, you have to curb it. You know, if you smoke, you have to stop because you just can't do it. The mechanism, the voice, the energy, even the very desire to go out and improvise it anew every night is affected by rest, by exercise, by nutrition. So, yeah, I mean, if I were 21 and listening to myself saying this, I'd be going, but it's really the fire in the belly that counts, right? The fire in the belly is totally dependent on how you take care of the temple that surrounds it, and I just keep finding that out more.
We come back to that word discipline again. Come.
Okay,
This
this
is
question is for
important.
Jonathan Pryce. Since you've been playing the same part for 2 years, how has your performance changed and grown?
Well, I haven't played it consistently for 2 years. I mean, we started rehearsals in June '89, and I played it for a year in London. And then I had seven-month break before starting rehearsals here. And it's like Topol was saying, I've never played a role. It feels like a second chance to do, and I've never done that with another role, to come back to something after a break. And I don't. It's changed very little, really. It's changed in nuance, and I'm working with new actors apart from Lea Salonga. And you have new sensibilities to an entirely new audience, an American audience, who are that much more aware of what the Vietnam War meant to them and to their country at the time, because in London it's very much more a mixed audience. And there's a greater political awareness here and a political turmoil, and it's very exciting to be. I don't think I could have gone on for 2 years playing it continuously in London, but it's a whole new set of circumstances here.
Why not?
And why not in London? I'd have been bored out of my head, I think. I cannot, and a lot of us, you just can't, without a break, you can't keep. I've never done it before. I mean, I've done straight play. The longest I'd done a straight play for was Uncle Vanya, which I did for 6 months, and after 3 months, we were taking it off on the back of the stage. But it's very draining to keep performing, and I like new challenges, and I think audiences like to see new things and be surprised.
This is a personal feeling of yours, though, but suppose that you did not have that particular feeling of wanting to do something different. In having a long run, such as Topol said, would you be bored with it as a role, or would you be bored with the audience saying, oh my goodness,
No, I think I'd be bored with. It's almost too strong a word. I think it would eventually have a negative effect on me and the performance. I just need change. And I've been very lucky in the past 10 years of my work that the change is involved going between theatre and film, going back from one to the other, and that they stimulate each other. It's looking for the stimulus all the time.
Would anyone else like to pick up on that and how you feel about long runs? Yes, Jessica.
I was just thinking about that. I did Annie for 2 years, and fortunately I got to grow up to from an orphan to Annie. But I remember the night before I started playing Annie, I was lying in bed and I thought, well, this is fantastic, you know. I could swallow poison and die now because I'm going to play Annie, and you know, that's it. And then this really weird thought occurred to me was, oh my God, but I have to do it for a year, and how am I going to do that? And I'm somebody who has the concentration of a child. Really, I get, you know, I need constant change and new stimuli and stuff. And the thing that changed that was the audience being different every night, and actors changing and going on vacation and working with new people and things. But with this play, with Substance of Fire, I thought, you know, this is so hard, and I'll only be able to do this for a short time, and the play has been extended for a lot longer than we had anticipated. And I love the idea of length. I love it because I'm really discovering, you know, and it's thrilling, it's unbelievable, and I feel really fortunate as opposed to like I'm in prison, you know. It's different, and growth and what that means.
Yeah, it means a lot. Topol.
I find it that when we talk about long runs, I don't see really the difference apart from, you know, wanting stimulants. I mean, we want to go from one thing to another. But I think that the profession of an actor is the challenge to come on stage every night and to make sure that the people out there believe you, that what you hear now from your colleagues on stage, you hear for the first time, what you answer is you answering for the first time, your reaction is for the first time. And I do admit that longer the show runs, that challenge is greater. And it takes more of an effort to make the audience believe, but I really find it a challenge. Because after all, we know that when we come for the previews, it's already after 2 months of rehearsals, so we've heard our colleagues and we answer them. And if we run for 40 performances, or if we run for 60 or for 400, there we have to do the same thing. I mean, we have to make these people believe that what we do for the first time. Otherwise, we are boring. This is the most important component of the acting profession. And I find it really, I mean, you all know that I've been doing it for probably altogether 1,200 or 1,300 performances. And I know that when I don't do it, when I try to switch on the automatic pilot, I'm caught immediately. I mean, I know that it didn't work. I mean, when I sing If I Were a Rich Man, and I don't really mean every word of it, the applause at the end is like that. And when I do mean, it works. And I find it quite hard work. I mean, no doubt about it. It's hard work, but you have to do it. This is our profession.
A very good actress and teacher that was on the panel said that you've taken as an actor, you've almost taken an oath to be responsible to your audience. And it's important to be responsible to them. And suppose you felt, oh my God, you're getting an appendectomy, and you look up at the physician, and he's saying, oh, this is the 100th appendectomy that I did today. How would you feel about that? Think about that for a bit. We had a lot of young people at that particular panel, and they said, yes, I hadn't thought about that. But it is that responsibility to an audience. It must come through it each time.
Isabel, with your permission, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Can I just, I mean, I love the question about whether we like new parts or old plays, classical plays. I think that for years, I mean, I started, as I mentioned, in a satirical theater, and obviously we worked political satirical theater, and we were writing the material as we were performing, and it was very exciting. But once I went into what we call the legitimate theater, the straight theater, I found after 1, 2, 3 plays that whether I saw Othello, and I did have the privilege of seeing Othello with the Lord, and I saw it probably 9 times, and I saw other plays, of course, and then when we came to do it, I realized that each one of us, every actor, has his own prism, and our prism is made of, obviously, our body, our voice, our look, our education, our knowledge, everything that we acquired in our life makes our prism, and whatever we deliver through our own prism, and it's never the same as the other actor or the previous actor did or will do, or another actor will do after you. So I find that whether it's a new play or a play that has been performed before, whether I saw it or I never heard of it, I know, I hope I know, that I'm doing my own thing, and I have no embarrassment whatsoever in doing a play that was
Wonderful
performed before.
explanation. Thank you. Jane, you wanted to say something before. Yes, I think so.
I'm sorry that I'm going to have to leave because I have to dub this film and the studio's waiting. But anyway, what I wanted to say was I think it's all dependent upon the role, long runs. When I did Great White Hope, I was playing a really depressed woman who kills herself at the end. It was totally excruciating that whole year. But Joy Davidman, who also dies in Shadowlands, was such an upbeat, joyous character that I think I could have gone on easily for a year and a half. And again, if you have a small role, you get like Uchi. But if you have a wonderful, joyous Tevye, I mean, I think Tevye would be a joy to do forever, wouldn't it?
I'm sorry I have to do this to you, but you're in. I can tell you, all of us, you're in. And I have to close this, and if you see the seminars, you find me saying this over and over again. Forgive me for interrupting you. You're all so talented, and you're also giving of your time and talents to us. I am so grateful to you for it. But I have to say that I'm Isabel Stevenson, and the American Theater Wing seminars on working the theater, and this seminar has been on the performance. I don't know when we've had a more articulate or a more interesting group of panelists that have been on this program. And although we are known for the Tony Awards, which are broadcast on CBS every summer, this is not the whole of the theater. We've been talking about Broadway and what it is to work on Broadway, and the Wing is constantly trying to develop audiences for Broadway. And our newest program is on Introduction to Broadway, and we hope that we do just that, where young people are coming to Broadway to see shows, and this is made possible by the goodwill and the generosity of Broadway producers of both Cats and Grand Hotel. And now we have to bring this to a close, and thank you again. Thank you for being here, and thank you especially for being here.